Hi, I'm Tyson Franklin, and welcome to this week's episode of the Podiatry Legends Podcast. With me today is Dr. Emily Splichal, formerly from New York City, now in Arizona. And Emily is a functional podiatrist and human movement specialist. She has been on the podcast before, way back, episode 67 and 71. And back in 71, Emily was the first person I knew back in the day who had COVID, and she was really sick. And I got her on the podcast when she wasn't feeling too well. But it's so good to see you now with a big smile on your face. So how are you doing today, Emily?
I'm doing amazing. So excited to talk to you.
I can't believe it was like over 5 years ago we chatted last time on the podcast.
I know. And I think there's some new stuff we can cover as far as podiatry and foot health and what I hope the direction of podiatry goes.
Okay, so today we're talking about the neurosensory foot. And I'm
Mhm.
going to sit on the wall like I know nothing, and you are going to educate me on the neurosensory foot.
Yes. So there is a very powerful function of the human foot that I was not really taught in podiatry school. I don't know how many of the other listeners were taught this, of course, depending on where we were trained, which country. I truly believe that podiatry is looked at from a heavily biomechanical perspective.
Yep.
However, there are thousands of nerves in the skin in the bottom of the feet that blends into the different fascial structures in the foot, and then our fascia interconnects the entire body. But being able to tap into these nerves, which is part of this neurosensory foot, has a very important role in how we control our movement. It actually has a role in emotional regulation, our perception of safety and feeling grounded in our body where we're standing, and then also on memory. So that I just want to set the tone there that there are
Yeah.
thousands of nerves that we should be tapping into on a daily basis to stimulate the brain, to access the brain, and to influence mood, memory, and movement.
Okay, if we go back a step though, how did you come into this particular area? So you went through podiatry school in the US. You would have gone through traditional pathway. You would have been quite heavily in surgery at the time and biomechanics. How did you step away from that side of things or come across the sensory foot?
Yeah. And if listeners listen back on episode 67, I'm sure I
Yeah.
included this, but my story within podiatry is not very linear. I do not recommend people do their journey the way that I did, but my background is actually in fitness, and I've been in the fitness industry for over 24 years. Went to podiatry school, which in the US, 4 years, yes, heavily surgical. I stayed within fitness and movement as I was going through the 4 years of podiatry school. Started residency, surgical residency, which in the US is now 3 years.
Yeah.
Halfway through my first year, it was very conflicting. I was having a big internal struggle with the way that I appreciated the foot, the way that I wanted to tell this movement story and this foot surgery or this foot story, because it was so surgically isolated from the rest of the body. It was like, here's the foot and the patient's over here. This is my impression of it, was that. So I actually left residency. This is the part I don't recommend. I left residency, said, I will be back. Went
Yeah.
back to school and did my master's in human movement. And that was 2 years. Now, as I was going through my master's in human movement, this happened to be the same time as the barefoot running boom. So it was 9, 10, 11, those years, which is when this was. And the book Born to Run, Minimal Shoes was coming out. So there was this influx of conversation about minimal footwear, natural foot health, and then barefoot science ties into that. In my 2 years of studying my master's in human movement, I focused on barefoot science. That was just what I wanted to dive into. I was looking at the minimal shoes and starting to say, okay, there's more to this. It's not just the shoe, but surfaces. Oh, what are these nerves in the feet, and tapping into it? Long story short, so that the listeners understand I am a licensed physician,
Yeah.
is that I then, after I finished that, I went back to residency, completed the surgical residency. I got licensed. I did surgery for 5 years. So practice that way, always with this undertone of integrative podiatry. And then in 2017, I actually put my scalpel down for the last time. And then I started doing functional and regenerative podiatry. And that's my approach now, which is heavily sensory based. So to answer your question, I got into the barefoot when the Born to Run book came out and that boom, which is when I was getting my master's.
Okay. When you were doing the surgery for 5 years, while you were doing it, or even when you went back and you finished your residency, was it very conflicting? Because you've learnt all this other stuff on the side, and these new beliefs that you had created. Was it very conflicting doing something that you didn't necessarily believe in?
Yes. So it was very, very conflicting. Of course, there's the check. So
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
hard. As a young doctor coming out, that you're like, oh, I can make that much money from a surgery. That was very enticing. But deeper into my ethos of what I believe in professionally and personally and all of that is that I didn't feel comfortable saying, you need to have surgery. The only thing that's going to help you is surgery. I knew there were these other options that we could tap into. So I started to change the conversation with patients, see how they would respond. And then what's interesting is that when I did put down the blade for the last time, is that the other important part of how I now shape my practice here is I do what's called direct care. So I'm not under insurance. It's very niche. I spend an hour with a patient. So very different how I practice today compared to when I first started,
Yeah.
is that I spend a lot of time building trust and rapport and really listening to the patient because I have time. I have time to listen to the patient because I see them for an hour. When you see a patient for 15 minutes, you don't. So I have a lot of patients who have built that trust and they say, well, can't you do my surgery? Like, I trust you. I like the way that you are explaining and building confidence in me for this procedure. Can you just do the surgery? And I was like, well, I don't do surgery anymore. So it's interesting how that kind of weaves. But
So you're
yeah,
not anti-surgery. If somebody still needs surgery, you'll still say you need to have an operation.
absolutely 100%.
Yeah.
And how I leverage that is, and my role in the surgical space, especially in the US podiatry, where there is the surgical capacity, is I am a second opinion to say, do I agree with the recommendation that you had that you need to have whatever, a lapidus
Mm.
or release your plantar fascia, whatever the surgery is, then they come to me and say, do you agree with this? And then what really is the effect long term on my function if I do the surgery? So oftentimes I will say, yes, I do agree that surgery is appropriate. These are the reasons. And then this is how I can work with you post-operatively to make sure we maintain as much function as possible. That's kind of my role now.
I had this conversation with somebody, a receptionist at the physiotherapy clinic I go to. And she said, oh, I've seen an orthopedic surgeon and they want to operate on this part of my foot and big bunion. And she said, but if they do, is there going to be any problems afterwards? And I went, well, have they explained this? And I went through the function of the foot when they do the surgery, depending on what procedure they're going to do. And when I explained all to her, she went, oh, they haven't said, they haven't even touched on that. They purely just said, I need to get the operation done. And the first thing I said to her, I went, out of curiosity, I said, are they painful? She went, oh, no, not really. And I went, well, if you're not in pain, I said, I'll guarantee after the operation you will be.
Yeah.
And she went, well, no one's actually explained it to me that way. And when I explained to her, she goes, you know what? I don't think I'm going to get it done. I think I'll put it off.
Yeah, I think that's important. And that is, so to me, I know the broader topic of what we're focusing on is the neurosensory foot,
Yeah.
but to me, that's a subsection of functional podiatry, which is truly what I believe in. And part of functional podiatry, how I approach it, is I explain all the options, making sure that the patient understands the ramifications and the decision and the thought process behind every option that they have, which is exactly what you were saying, right? Is, do you have pain? Well, if you don't have pain, like, here, look at your x-rays. Okay, maybe this, but your joint looks beautiful and you don't have pain. So yes, you have a bump and your foot is wide,
Yeah.
but dot, dot, right? And then say, honestly, it's up to you. These are your choices. If you don't do it, and you don't have to have it this year, you could have it in 5 years, right? If you want to. But if you have it in 5 years, then you're postmenopausal. Well, maybe you have some osteopenia. This is literally what I say to my patients. So they understand the bigger picture. versus just you have a bunion, it's this angle, therefore you should have surgery. And the only thing that will fix it is surgery. So
Yeah.
that's all I can offer you, right?
Yeah.
It's
When I asked you before about when you were doing the surgery, did it go against your new beliefs that you had? Is I think in podiatry, there's so many aspects of podiatry. There's so many areas of podiatry you can go into. And I sometimes think some podiatrists are unhappy because they're in areas of podiatry that it goes against their beliefs in one way or
yeah,
another, but they keep doing it because of either the money
yeah,
or they're working somewhere and the employer say, no, this is what you must do. And I think
yeah,
if podiatrists all just followed the path that makes them happy a little bit more,
yeah,
the profession overall will be happier.
yeah. Oh my gosh. Like, hallelujah, amen. I
Yeah.
don't know what to say. But yes, yes, 100%. Because I have friends and colleagues that I went to school with, and they say, how do you do what you do? What if I want to incorporate these things in
Yeah.
it? And I'm like, you do it. Like you have to do it. And I remember when I first started doing like growth factor injections, different regenerative injections. And my colleagues would say, how is it that you're selling these so easily? Because in the US, they're like 1,500 plus an injection, right? And they're like, how are you doing this? Insurance doesn't cover it. It's a fee for service thing. And I'm like, it's because I believe in them. So I'm practicing in a way that is truly authentic to the message that I want to create. So yes, I encourage people that if you don't want to do wound care and you feel like you're stuck in wound care or whatever, as an
Yeah.
example, listen to yourself, because how many years would people practice? 30, 40 years maybe in a
Yeah.
profession? That is a long 40 years if you like don't like what you're doing. But I truly believe that people need to listen to what they're drawn to. What aspect of podiatry really just gets you fired up? To me, it's
Mm.
education. It's not even the functional podiatry. What is it? I love to educate. So if I had to see all day, 9 to 5, plantar fasciitis, and that's it, I would make it exciting by educating and seeing every new patient as this educational opportunity that I could just be like, what little nugget of knowledge am I going to give this patient? And to me, that's satisfying.
I
That's not
love that.
everyone. People don't like that, right? But push into what really will make you feel satisfied in your purpose. So, yes, great point that you made.
No, I love that because, like, anyone who's listened to the podcast for a period of time will know that I don't do wounds. If a wound came into my clinic, it would very quickly back out of my clinic. I didn't like them. If I looked at them, I'd dry reach, maybe sick. So I worked out really early on. And I remember the first job I ever applied for, I went for it. I got the job. And then I said, oh, by the way, just let you know, I don't do wounds. And she went, what? I said, I don't do wounds. She said, well, what if someone comes in with an ulcer? I said, you'll be treating them. I won't do it. I said, I refuse to do it. And I still got the job. And I think that's a really important point for everyone. When you're talking to an employer, be really honest about what you like and what you dislike. If you really don't want to treat something, tell them at the interview you don't want to treat it. Don't tell them
Yeah.
after you start the job.
Right. Yes. Transparency, being straightforward. Yeah, I like it.
So let's move on to the sensory foot. What are we talking about here?
Again, this was not taught in podiatry school, but
Yes.
for the listeners to extrapolate the verbiage. So this is the proper verbiage of how we want to be using it, and the way that it applies to our patients is from a neurosensory perspective, somatosensory, you could say that. So somatic body movement, right? Your somatosensory cortex, which is part of your neocortex, and that's how we control movement, is based off of sensory information in, motor output, or afferent, efferent, right? Input, output. The input nerves are exteroception. This exteroception is how your body relates to the external environment. And there's two main ones that relate to the foot and the ankle: proprioceptors and
Mm-hmm.
mechanoreceptors. Now, this is an important distinction between them because they are misused all the time, that people will refer to everything as proprioception, and that's actually not fully accurate. When I explain to patients or teach around this is proprioceptors, I focus very much around joints. So joint capsules, ligaments, tendons, retinaculum. But here we're going to think the ankle, right? So just how are we perceiving the position of the ankle and shifts in the ankle? Got it. Okay. But then that works with mechanoception, which is touch, which are the nerves in the bottom of the foot, which is touching the ground. These mechanoceptors or touch receptors are sensitive to different stimuli, and there's different types of them. And they work together with the proprioceptors to then feed overall foot and ankle awareness during dynamic movement. Okay. Now, why this is important is that if you get very specific into the neurosensory foot, the way that I create programming, let's say around an ankle sprain or neuropathy or high level performing athletes or someone who has a stroke, is that I target these very specific nerves through different modalities and methods. If I continue to educate, the main proprioceptors, this is where you have your Golgi tendon and your muscle spindles, if you remember those.
Yeah.
They're like a stretch reflex. So when someone sprains their ankle, there's a disruption in perineal reaction time. That's a proprioceptive response, right? And we stabilize proprioceptively based off of the rate that those proprioceptors are stimulated, and then the interpretation happens. That's part of it. Mechanoceptors or touch receptors in the bottom of the feet are the same as on your hand, and there's four main ones. Technically, they're an SA1, SA2, FA1, FA2, if we want to get specific. The Merkel disc, which is one, is sensitive to two-point discrimination, which is Braille. And then the Nervoso products, if anyone's familiar with Nervoso, those are two-point discrimination, Merkel disc. You have skin stretch, which is a Ruffini ending. That would be horizontal shear forces on the foot, right? Okay. And then the other two, FA1, FA2, these are corpuscles. These are sensitive to vibration. We experience vibration every time our foot strikes the ground, and that's how you perceive ground reaction forces. So understanding the role of vibration, texture, skin stretch, joint movements, right? You're feeding the brain in different pathways. To me, that is very important because let's take an example of an ankle sprain. Ankle sprain, well, most podiatrists will say you sprained your ankle, go do physical therapy. Physical therapy has them stand on an Eric's pad or a foam pad to do unstable training or on a bosu or something wobbly, right? That people think that's how you have to train an ankle sprain is by perturbing or irritating the proprioceptors. Sure. But as soon as you go on those surfaces that are squishy, like an Eric's pad or a foam pad, you've just blocked, taken away, and damped the mechanoceptors in the bottom of the foot, which work with the proprioceptors to stabilize the ankle. That's actually not deleterious, but it is counterproductive to creating true, quick, and efficient ankle stability. So that's one example of how you could start to think of it podiatrically, knowing the neurosensory foot and how we access these different nerves.
So if regarding, say, an ankle sprain, because that was the injury we were talking about, what would you do differently than just having someone on an unstable surface or like a wobble board?
Yep. So I would always rehab them barefoot. And I remember when I was practicing in New York City, all the physical therapists, this is in the days of paper prescription pads also, is that I would write on the paper prescription pad, the physical therapy referral, but it would be in bold and underlined. I would say no shoes, barefoot, like underlined. And I was like, do not put shoes on this patient when you are rehabbing their ankle, right? So I need to access the skin on the bottom of the foot. I need them to maybe use a vibration platform to wake up the nerves of the foot first. Then do your stability training. Maybe you want to use some of the Nervoso products and stimulate the texture on the bottom of the foot. Maybe you do that. Walk across a pebble path or just be on a hard surface, spread those toes, access the skin. And now we do all of our single leg training and whatnot. So that's how I would start to incorporate that. I'm also a big believer when it comes to building ankle stability and single leg stability, which I'm a huge advocate of, is you do not build resilient ankle stability by going on harder and harder unstable surfaces. That doesn't translate to the way that your subtalar joint and your ankle joint are actually perturbed during bipedalism or walking. It's a flutter, right? You're like invert, internal, external, right? It's like a flutter. So you don't need to be on this crazy wobbly Dynadisc and pillow and a challenging indo board. There's so many unstable surfaces that mimic things like surfing, right? Or that's a different level of ankle stability that is
Yeah.
not needed to walk across the room and not sprain your ankle, right? So the way that you actually do that is through playing with visual, playing with vestibular, playing with dual tasking, do eye-hand coordination while standing on one leg. So you're teaching the nervous system to navigate transferable perturbations of, okay, when I'm walking across and I'm walking, which requires single leg stability, as I'm walking, I need to be able to balance on one leg while I happen to move my eyes to look at something that was over here because I heard something or I needed to navigate. That's the type of balance and stability that we need to create. And that's a neurosensory approach to doing it.
Okay. So instead of just being localized to this is the ankle sprain, get on that wobble board and start balancing, you're saying, can you balance? And at the same time, can you juggle?
Well, maybe not juggle, but
Yeah, that's taking it to an extreme. Especially, well,
yes.
if you were a clown in the circus with an ankle sprain,
Then
yes,
yes.
juggling would be very beneficial. While
Yes, I usually joke, can you text, talk, and walk at the same time?
yeah,
That's a little bit more while carrying your Starbucks, right? I don't know. Like
yeah, but
that to
that
me,
actually makes perfect sense though, because you're never just standing there in one spot trying to actually balance. That's not how we live our lives. We are doing other things which are taking away our attention to the
yes.
surface that we're walking on. So we've got to be prepared. You will be doing something else. Usually every time I've ever had an ankle sprain, and I've had lots of them, I'm never just standing there in one spot. I'm
Right.
actually doing something.
Yep. Yep. Now, what I see is most people are completely unaware of their feet. They just don't know where their feet are. And one thing that I always think of as like a good test of your foot to ground awareness, perception, sure, play proprioception and mechanoception, is when you walk down the stairs, do you have to look down at the stairs as you're walking down the stairs? Do you look where your foot goes? A lot of people do because they don't know where their foot is relative to the step and the space and the distance and right the rate at which the foot is going down. It's a very complex neurosensory process to human movement is to know that, the accuracy of that, right? So that's what I try to achieve also in my patients.
Like you said, this is not taught at podiatry school.
No, it's not. And then honestly, if you take it even further, which is again, part of the function of the neurosensory foot is that fascially our feet are connected to our pelvic floor, which is connected to your diaphragm, which is connected to your tongue. So every patient that I am working with creates some sort of fascial stabilization pathway as part of their homework or their programming or the correctives or whatever it is, because truly functional feet have to connect to your center of mass, period. And that's how we stabilize during walking or running or jumping.
While you've been doing this, what has the feedback been from, say, in the United States? That's where you're based, even though I know you were in Australia recently at
Yes.
a conference.
Yep. And I've been lucky to teach podiatrists across Australia, South Africa, the UK, Canada, and a little bit in the US because the US is so surgically focused. But yeah, early in my career, if you're wondering how people respond,
Yeah.
The profession responds to how I practice.
Yes.
Yeah, they think I'm probably way out in left field and like cuckoo and making things up. But that was definitely on the early side. And then now more and more will I see, not a ton, but more will I see be like, I think there's something to this. I think that let me look at toe spacers. What is this short foot, right? Like what is, so you start to see more and more of it. I personally, in the United States, focus or find a little bit more openness to the concepts in chiropractic and physical therapy, not so much in
Yeah.
podiatry, a little bit. And I think the hard part is that it's a new lens at which you're looking at things. And sometimes when you have this new lens and you were taught this, you're like, I don't know how to like, do I have to stop this and just do this? Or how do I like, how do they weave in? And that is the biggest question of what I get from people is I know I need to roll my foot on a lacrosse ball. I mean, that is the most well-accepted thing now,
Yeah.
right? I would just say when you roll the foot on the lacrosse ball, because you just make it like a textured lacrosse ball, so you get a little bit more to the nervous system. But even if I'm using a vibration roller, what is the benefit if you just tell your patients, roll out your calves, just foam roll your calf? That's now commonplace to say foam roll your calf, not just stretch your calf, but foam roll, right? Roll, massage, something. But we should understand, what is the effect if you add vibration to that foam roller? Who is that good for and how does that work? That's a neurosensory concept to now add vibration to the foam roller. It's going to downregulate the muscle spindles, which works particularly well in those in a overly supinated high arch foot, or those that have a little bit of spasticity in it, like a dystonia or post-stroke or something like that. Then you can get a little bit more specific in the recommendation.
When you were doing all this initially, and like you said, in the United States, it wasn't as accepted as it has been overseas, was it disheartening? Did you feel that, am I wasting my time here? No one's listening to me. Or did you go, you know what? I don't care what the profession thinks. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm learning and understanding. I'm getting better at. I'm getting the results. All I care about is my patients. I don't care about what other podiatrists think.
Yeah, totally. So
Good.
I was not, now I'm doing it more for the profession because I actually would love to have a specialty niche focus in this functional podiatry, expanded neurosensory understanding of the foot here. In the beginning, I was like, no, I believe 100% behind what I'm doing. I'm helping my patients. I'm not hurting my patients. My patients are getting better. Patients are coming to me specifically because they know I have this outside of the box approach. So I was pushing into it and then
Yeah.
was like, quiet the naysayers or thicken your skin or whatever the saying would be. But it's backed by science, right? I'm not making this up. I'm not doing like voodoo something,
You're not
witchcraft.
sacrificing a goat or anything like that
Yeah,
before you
no,
start. Yeah.
none of that. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that there is research, and there's now more and more research behind what is being done on this neurosensory with the barefoot. There's a lot of research behind, say, even athletically, performance. Say, this group of athletes did barefoot movement prep and they incorporated intrinsic foot muscle strengthening in their whatever preseason. Then they look at the injury history of that season and the athletes, and they're like, we have less injuries when we wake up the foot and strengthen the foot as part of our programming. So you start to see these things. That's the stuff that is very encouraging to me to then say, okay, I know, I mean, even though I know I'm not doing harm to my patients, but it is fed off of science.
Yeah. And you're not saying, because when you're talking about barefoot, because as soon as people hear barefoot, the barefoot movement, they think of these crazy people running down the street with no shoes on, running on bitumen. And you're thinking, because I remember when I was running, I'd see the occasional person run past me barefoot and I'd just be shaking my head going, oh, it must be sore on your feet. But anyway,
Yes.
That's not what you're saying. Footwear is still important.
Yes, 100%. Yes. So this is probably the negative outcome of the barefoot running boom, which
Yeah.
was at 9, 10, 11, 12, like that window was really where it was the biggest. Is that's when the early part of my career. And I remember people saying the bad press that was happening. I think Vibram got sued because they made some false claims about wearing 5 fingers will make your feet stronger, something like that.
Yeah.
That they were saying, oh, Emily, don't you think that all of this press is going to be damaging to your career? I was like, absolutely not, because I'm not talking about running. I'm talking about barefoot stimulation, barefoot training, how to access your foot, how to wake up these nerves, how to get into your intrinsic muscle. I'm not even talking about running. I never even said that word. I don't know why there is this correlation to think, oh, Emily thinks everyone should be throwing away all their shoes, walking outside in bare feet and running barefoot. Didn't say that.
Yeah, well,
Once.
because the only reason I said that is just to point out to people, because they didn't listen to episode 67 and it was titled Barefoot Function and Barefoot Science. I remember when I went to get you come on the first time and I was going, oh, geez, I hope this isn't a crazy person who's going to talk about run down the street bare feet. And you weren't. And I just thought it
No.
was important to point that out to people if they're listening to this, that's not what we're talking about. That's not,
Yes,
and
they
it's not what you're trying to recommend people to do.
no. What I talk about is what can we do every day that supports the natural design of the human foot. This involves some sort of barefoot stimulation every single day. Literally walk around your home barefoot for 30 minutes. That's all I'm talking about. This is not anything crazy, right? Something like that. Stimulate and release your feet every morning. Roll on a lacrosse ball if you want, a golf ball, a tennis ball, a neuro ball, whatever it is, but you're doing something to the intrinsics. I teach people how to set their base. So just feel your tripod and spread your toes as wide as you can. Now, can we activate our toe flexors? And I teach it through a forward lean. So you're just activating. Can we do some deep breaths? And every time you push your toe down, you are going to exhale. So you sink your foot with your diaphragm. Can you balance on one leg for 10 seconds? Do that 2 times each foot. Bam. That's what I'm talking about. Like
Yeah.
it's a very easy, innate, natural foot function. Then put on your shoes. And honestly, I'll have the conversation about shoes with you, but that's not even my first goal. Let me
Mm.
just get this first habit, then we'll talk about that when you're ready. So that's what I'm trying to advocate.
Yeah. And I don't think there'd be one person listening to this who wouldn't agree when you've had shoes on all day, you take them off and you go and walk on grass for 5 or 10 minutes and just walk around bare feet, feel it, how good you feel.
Yeah.
And how good your feet feel after you've actually done that.
Yep. Yep. You're just right. And that's part of why I love even things like toe spacers are great. You just want to do the opposite of what you've been in
Yeah.
all day and just like let the puppies breathe. That's all that I'm in,
I
right? And then
like that.
we could go heavier. I could talk about earthing if you want. Like I can talk about there's more depth that you can go into it, but I like that you had said that because I think all the podiatrists listening would say, I get it. Or like walking on the beach, right? Go
Yeah.
on holiday, walk on the beach, and you're like, there is something about just like the sand between my toes.
Oh, it feels
Love it.
fantastic.
Yeah. And I'm not saying go play beach volleyball so you get plantar fasciitis
Yeah.
or a post-tib tendonitis and your bare feet on the sand. No, just feel what it feels like to just, I love it. And you know what I think is important, Tyson, is that I still prescribe orthotics.
Yeah.
I still tell people you need with your foot to have a medial flange custom orthotic and you cannot be in minimal shoes. Like I still say stuff like that. I just try to get people as close to natural as possible. Or what little things can we do to optimize the sensory stimulation, the spreading of the digits, getting your feet to your diaphragm based off of your reality. I always meet the patient where their reality is. And I kind of like your wound care. I just said, I will never, I don't know if I have an orthotic somewhere. I would never just say, this is a magic insert and this is all you need and it will take all your problems away. I can't do that.
Yeah.
I'll sell it to you, but then I will give you exercises to do also because it's always that combination.
So, are you doing any courses around the place if people wanted to tap into any of this?
Yeah, so most of my courses have moved to online just
Yeah.
because of post-COVID shift. But all of those, so my education company is EBFA Global. People can go there, and I have a lot of free lectures.
So that would be
And,
EBFA Globe.
and yep, ebfaglobal.com. Go
Yep.
there, and it will link out to essentially like an online school. You could think of that where there's free lectures, there's small little 1 hour, $10 lectures. One, as an example, is an ultimate footwear guide. And I essentially go through how I, as a functional podiatrist, think about footwear recommendations and teaser on that. That is based on 3 things: foot type, injury history, and the demands that you're going to place the foot under. And I just go through my thought process on that. And then I do have more in-depth certifications if people want to dive into that. What I would say, and I think it's sometimes important, is I know that we're all podiatrists listening here. So
Yeah.
if someone is like, what is she going to teach me about flat feet? I understand the way the subtalar joint moves and things like that. That's not the point of these lectures. It's more, this is a snapshot into the lens at which I look at things. And when I'm approached by someone who does have whatever, a moderate navicular drop, how do I think about that bigger picture on the effects of their walking or their athleticism or their injury risk? And what do I give them? Right. So I think sometimes those things can be very helpful to just see a little peek into the brain of how I'm looking at things.
Yeah. And I like the way too, how when you're doing all this stuff, you're a podiatrist, so that's your background, but you are working with other professions. And therefore, you'll be getting the feedback from them as well as what they've been taught.
Yes.
And that probably helped you look at things in a sort of a broader scope as well.
Yeah, no, I studied under Diane Lee, who is, in my opinion, one of the best pelvic floor specialists. She's a Canadian. She's a physical therapist by trade, a lot into breathing, breath work,
Yeah.
and the role of the diaphragm. A lot of fascial specialists, such as Robert Schleip, who is out of Germany. And there's the World Fascial Congress, and how do we pull that information? James Earls he used to be a body worker, and then he's now takes this really unique anthropological evolutionary approach to gait. So he's great. So I've studied under him. So I try to push into it. And then one of my favorite that I'm looking into now, which is very unique in podiatry, is this emotional somatic trauma side. And I'm not a therapist, I'm not a trauma specialist,
Yeah.
but there is something as clinicians when we are encountered by patients who have had chronic conditions and their emotional relationship or identity to the chronic condition. Have to navigate that. And I started to incorporate that in my practice when I started seeing a lot of idiopathic neuropathies. For anyone who has treated idiopathic neuropathy knows that patient is going to be a heavy emotional journey. I don't know
Yeah.
if you've ever experienced any of it, but and it's making sure that they feel heard, but how do we navigate it? And then just further in my career, I started getting a lot of dystonias, RSD or CRPS, and just looking at these chronic nerve presentations and the autonomic nervous system override that comes with it to then just navigate it and know the effect. That's not taught in podiatry school either. And I think it should be. You can't not talk about emotional regulation and the autonomic nervous system and the primal function of the nervous system of am I safe, am I not safe is the undertone of every patient, especially surgically. If that patient doesn't feel surgically and they're going into the surgery in a fight or flight state, how does that help the healing process of that surgery? So
Yeah. Have you
like
tried to get this into the universities at the podiatry schools?
yes, earlier in my career. And
Yeah.
then honestly, I'm just very busy now to get it. But it is my life goal, career goal as I navigate through my different companies. And I'm trying to grow Naboso till it is acquired so I can then be like, how do I pay back my profession? Like, how do
Yeah.
I try to? That would be my ultimate post Naboso is to then go back and say, what do we need to add in the schools? And how do we have to look at the body? Because patients are demanding more from their care and from their physicians. And I don't know how it is in Australia and other countries, but a lot of people are pushing out of the healthcare system, meaning the health insurance system, and they seek practitioners that are not under insurance because one, they're not, all these insurances don't cover anything anyway, but to say, I want someone who will give me the time to really listen and who will think of me as a whole, this whole complex human being that
Yeah.
has lots of emotions and trauma and my sleep and my diet and my inflammation. And they're thinking of all of those things, not just locally the plantar fascia that's on my foot way down there.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I've had a few podiatrists say that lately. I know some that are doing extra study in areas that previously were thought, why would a podiatrist be looking at that? But they just
Mm-hmm.
know if they can have extra skills, whether it's health, nutrition,
Yep.
sleep disorders, all those type of areas, if they can bring that information into the consultation room, it
Yeah.
just gives them a broader look at the actual patient
Mm-hmm.
and they can help them in so many other ways.
Yeah. No, 100%. And then that's where you would say, they took this nutrition course just to have an understanding to be able to appropriately guide the patient to a practitioner who specializes in maybe more complex nutrition. That's how I look at it, is saying
Yeah.
you need to know just enough to know when it's flagged to refer them out and to add this into your collective approach with a patient. I'm very into like collective approaches. Let's all team treat this patient through our different specialties because the human is way too complex for it
Yeah,
to
but
just be
even
one person.
even my daughter, she's finishing pharmacy at the moment, and I was having lunch with her the other day, and she was even saying, "I'm thinking when I finish pharmacy that I might do some other study in nutrition because I just know." Because she works in a pharmacy at the moment, she goes, the amount of people that come in with medications, but then when I'm talking to them, I know their health and nutrition on that side of things is so important to what they're doing.
Mhm.
And I was really impressed that she's even thinking about that now before she's even graduated.
Love it. Love it.
So
Yep.
now, before we finish up, you have a new book, Sensory Sapiens.
I do. I do. I launched that or published that 6 weeks ago, roughly. So end of
Oh, it's
May.
fresh.
No, end of April, end of April. But yes, so it's a fresh book, Sensory Sapiens, available on all the Amazons around the world. And it is a sensory-based approach to movement and longevity. And a lot of it was part of what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Goes in a little bit deeper into interoception, that ties onto the emotional side. But it really is kind of part of my professional journey through the brain or the nervous system, which started in the foot. Barefoot Science, that was my first book, Barefoot Strong. That was really looking at the foot from a sensory gateway into, oh, the whole body is a sensory gateway. And one fun fact that I'll share from it is that our fascia, which is the connective tissue spider web of your human body, which runs every aspect of your body, like the periosteum of your bone, right? So it surrounds every bone into your muscles, fascia, tendons, has over 100 million sensory nerves. 100 million sensory nerves in this connective tissue of your body, which just means your fascia, your internal skeleton is what I consider it, is sensory seeking. And of those 100 million sensory nerves, about 85% of them have a emotional function, which
It's funny.
means
Mm.
motion is emotion. You cannot move the human body without influencing connection to self and therefore emotional processing. And that's why I'm such a huge advocate of moving, and like you have to move for like quality of life and feeling connected to your body and emotional regulation and all of these things. It's like move, move, never stop moving. Is there's such a huge interplay between fascia and emotion and therefore movement.
That's what the Human Lab episode was talking about as well, that every
Look,
organ of the body is sensory, is picking up movement
100%. Yep.
and it's giving that feedback. They said the only part that doesn't is the brain. It's just there to control what's happening. It takes all that information,
Yep.
but it doesn't actually feel anything itself. But every other part of your body does.
Yep. I just think that is so fascinating and a demonstration of why or how important this structure is that professionals that deal with movement in the human body need to understand it, need to appreciate it. You don't have to be an expert, but
Yeah.
need to understand its role.
Okay. So have you got anything you would like to say before we wrap up? Other than I want to
Uh,
point out too that I've seen some videos of you recently doing ballroom dancing, and you're pretty awesome at it.
You're so kind. Thank you. That makes my heart happy because I've only been doing it a year.
Is that all you've
I've
been
been
doing it for?
Yes, I've been doing it a year and then we started competing. So we really buckled down and
Yeah.
focused in January. So 6 months we've been like super focused.
Oh, wow. I thought it
And
was something you've been doing most of your life because you just do it. You look like you're a natural at it.
wow, well, you're very kind. I would say that my background as a gymnast,
Oh, yeah.
being in fitness, knowing and loving the sensory system that I have, thank gosh, knock on wood, high perception of where I am in space. That's an important part of dancing, obviously. But it has given me a whole new appreciation of feet and foot strength. And sometimes I get a little bit criticized because I'm wearing heels as a
Yeah.
podiatrist while I'm dancing, but you have to wear the heels. Plus, my boyfriend is 6'4", so he's very tall.
Yeah.
Need them just to kind of counter it. But what's really interesting is when you do ballroom, you actually are pushing into the ground. And there's this deep appreciation for the ground and how your foot has to articulate and move on it. And you actually are not supposed to really pick up your feet that much when you are doing ballroom. So it's really interesting. And I try to spin everything to deepen my understanding of movement and foot health. So I'm sure something will come out of my time doing ballroom from an education
I'm sure it will. So anyway, back to the question I asked. Is there anything you want to say before we wrap up, before I dive into something else?
Yes, no, all good. Side tangent. I guess I would just tell people to release your feet and just think about that and build a little 5-minute daily foot reset habit. And I have some of these on YouTube, and people are like, what would I do? Release the bottom of your feet, spread your toes, set your base, activate your toes, stand on one leg. Those would be my go-tos.
And your YouTube channel is Dr. Emily Splichal?
Yes, but I think the easiest way to find me, that I always tell people, is just put Dr. Emily barefoot, Dr. Emily foot exercise, but link Dr. Emily to anything in relation to the foot, and it'll pop up some good things. I'm sure there's some other Dr. Emily's in the world, but a lot of content out there. And then my books are on Amazon. If people are curious just to see how I treat, just curious, my website is either my name or it's thefunctionalfootdoc.com. And my practice is the Center for Functional and Regenerative Podiatry.
Okay. And if anyone's driving in the car at the moment, don't worry about trying to write that down. Just go to the podiatrylegends.com website. Go to this episode and I'll have all these links in the show notes. So, Emily, I want to thank you for coming back on the Podiatry Legends podcast. This has been fun once again, and hopefully I'll catch up with you when I'm in Arizona next time.
Yes, please do.
Okay, thanks
so
a lot.